Hello everybody and welcome back. Thank you very much for joining me. My name's Deborah Hatswell and you're listening to the BBR Case Files. Tonight I'm sharing with you a number of reports with creatures that were absolutely chilling. As we have so many new listeners, I feel these cases really deserve more airtime. So join me as I share cases that would make your blood run cold, just as it did to the witnesses involved. These case notes are made from my conversations with the witness, or they've been written out by the witness themselves. We'll visit a lone cottage in Scotland where a dogman-like creature stalked the family, at one point knocking on the window. We'll hear from a young girl who was watched by a dogman at a family home. She feels has watched her family for generations, and a very similar case to that in Derbyshire. Then, in our last case, we hear from Robert Manton, who was saved from certain death by an unknown creature in Wales when a clan of sasquatch lost one of their own in the battle. First, let's hear Sammy's experience with a dogman named Wolfer. Sammy said, "Back in 2006, my dad was sadly diagnosed with terminal bowel cancer. I think this was also the year I began seeing the dogman. I'm not sure if this is when I first noticed him or what he was at first. After school, my normal routine was to get changed, have a quick cuppa, do some homework while dinner was being made, and I'd take our dogs out for a quick walk. There was a field directly opposite our house, with a railway line at the far end of it, which had a banking and that travelled the length of the field and beyond. It had a steel fencing, which was quite tall, as the banking was rather steep, and it was covered with some shrubbery and small trees. The field was mostly disused back then. The grass would grow to about hip high and was rarely cut. I only remember it being cut in recent years. I should say I live in Scotland. Shrubbery and trees surrounded the boggy patch and the pond at the bottom near the fencing. This field was ideal for us to walk the dogs. We'd still stay close to the fences though. We didn't want to, ruin the crop just in case. We had a Labrador and a Lab Cross, both medium to large dogs and rather friendly without being scared of anything really. They'd bark for the doorbell, but they'd only play growl with each other, unless there was aggression shown to one of their humans. In the evening, after people and animals had been fed, the dogs would go on another walk about 7, 8 p.m. and then they'd go for a last walk, usually about 10 or 11 o'clock at night. We all took turns taking the dogs out, but due to Dad's illness, sometimes he just couldn't, and I took on most of the responsibility. One evening, it was still light out, and I believe it was September time, probably about 7 or 8 p.m. The sun was setting, and kind of yellowy orange red hues were on the sky. It was beautiful. I walked across the field and with the dogs, and suddenly they began growling towards the bottom of the field. I wasn't sure what they were growling at until I saw a tall, dark figure. The figure was standing quite far down the field, so I couldn't see any features. However, I did note that whoever it was, they were much taller than me. I recall how high the grass was and thinking, how can the dogs have even seen that guy? I thought this figure was an older teen, perhaps in a black hoodie or something, and suddenly the figure dashed into the trees and shrubs surrounding the bog. I felt a little bit uneasy, and the dogs were barking now, so I took them back to the house. Thought little of it. Later on in that year, I'd need to take a little pocket torch with me at night to see where I was going, and to see where the poop was so I could clean it up, and to untangle leads and things. Often I'd be walking the dogs in the pitch dark, and they'd growl. I'd shine my torch and see nothing. After that, I had the "that's not a cat" incident, and I'd start to see it more. So one night, we were walking along the boundaries of the field on the railway side. As usual, with my torch, the dogs growled up on the banking. Now there was a lot of overgrown plants along the fence line, some nearly as tall as myself, and they By this time, they'd decayed. They were very brittle stalks. I shone the light up the banking, thinking there must be something up there, and I caught some amber red eyes in the torchlight. Okay, I thought, it's just a cat or something on the banking. My brain registered that the eyes were facing forwards, quite large. So I was going to going through a list of things that lived here, indigenous predators. What could it have been? So I settled on a big house cat, as it hadn't moved away immediately like a fox or a badger might. Years ago, we had a Maine Coon kitty, so I was comparing the size of its eyes to that. When the owner of the eyes moved from left to right, the eyes never left me as it moved. Whatever it was, it continued to look right at me as I continued to shine my little torch directly into its eyes. Looking back, it was no wonder it moved away, but I was utterly transfixed. I shook out of that pretty quick once I realised that the fencing hadn't broken my vision of the eyes at all. It should have if it was behind that fence. Whatever it was on the same level ground that I was on, and it was tall. Far taller than my 5'5". That's when I turned tail, and we all got back into the house as fast as we could. I was shaken, and I may have been mildly hysterical as I explained what happened in the field. My parents were pretty calm about it. They did say I could take the dogs into the back garden at night time from now on, or Mum would come with me when I went to the field. So that's what we did. And when it was dark, we went out with the dogs in the back garden, or we went down into the fields together. Sometimes we'd see eye shine, and if it was there, the dogs would growl and we'd head back in. We gradually got used to the back garden more until we only used that field in the daytime. For a short time, nothing untoward happened, just long enough for me to let my guard down. I'm not sure about that, but that was the feeling that I had. For the purpose of context, I'll explain. Standing facing the bottom of our garden, there was a shed on the left with a small veg patch directly behind it. There was a larger patch of gravel, a dogwood tree, and these dark leaf shrub of some kind. We have a larger vegetable patch behind that, and then some grass with more trees, kind of a lilac shrub, and long plain grass lawn on the right, a small path between the lawn and the vegetable patches, normal garden. One night, I didn't make it very far up the path before the dogs ran back to me, cowered at my legs. I was a little put out that these big dogs were cowering behind my knees. As I got closer to the dogwood tree, they seemed to melt further away. The moon was full that night, so I hadn't bothered bringing a torch. I thought I could see a shape hiding in the tree, which wasn't very mature then. It only stood about 9 feet at the most. It retained a lot of its bushy twigs. I spoke aloud. "Who's there? I can see you." Then some gravel crunched and a twig snapped. The figure seemed to move behind the tall tree. "I can hear you." I should mention, I was a bit of a stroppy brat as a teen. I was beginning to feel really ticked off that some weirdo was in my garden. There's a gentle breeze, otherwise it's still. I thought, I can smell that, like the scent of wet dog or something. Unmistakable for any dog owner. I said, "I can smell you." And just then, the figure bounded away from the tree, away from me, and towards the fence. They leapt the fence so gracefully they may well have stepped over it. And this is when I got a really good look at what was hiding in our garden. Standing about 7 feet tall at least. It looked to be covered in dark fur, but it had a man's torso and human-like arms, just longer than ours. It had some scary-looking weaponized hands, and its mouth was slightly ajar as it loped, and I saw teeth. Lots of teeth. Lots of long, sharp-looking teeth in the moonlight. I noticed its legs looked wrong. They were backwards, like a canine's hind leg. I must have been, 6 feet away, if not closer, before it had banded away over that fence. This thing went wide along the fence line in our neighbour's garden. I found out the next morning he'd bought a lot of old timber and it was placed there. It then hopped the fence back into our garden, and as it disappeared into a massive shadow surrounding the lilac bush. I know this next part was dumb. Hindsight's 2020, and I 100% do not recommend what I did next. I don't know if it was teenage hormones or fight or flight instincts, but all I knew was that my life was falling apart around me as it was, and I was filled with this self-protective instinct, really, almost like a surge of adrenaline. I walked right up to that lavender bush and I growled like some dog, imitating demon-possessed child, and I said, "You ever hurt my dogs again, and I will kill you." I then growled for good measure and stalked back along the path, giving this thing my back. Stupid, maybe. Stupid and soppy, yeah, probably. I don't agree with her. I think she did the right thing. And then she said, by the time I got to the living room, I was shaking and panting. The dogs had their tails firmly curled between her legs, and I was in full blown hysterics. I explained to my parents what I'd just seen, what I could only describe as a werewolf. I noticed their exchange of looks, and they immediately began to placate me. My mum said, "We know, we've been seeing it for a while, but it won't hurt you. Just don't communicate with it, and don't pretend that it doesn't exist." Well, hadn't that ship's already sailed? My mum also admitted that she had thought it was something up in a tree when she'd been taking the dogs out in the back garden and she'd caught eyeshine up high. I thought she'd meant how tall it was, but after hearing some other people's experiences now, perhaps it really was sitting up in a tree. My dad subtly interrogated me and made remarks about its snout. Was it long like this, like a greyhound but wider? And he drew on the margins of the Daily Mirror newspaper to show me what he meant. My dad was the biggest sceptic you could meet, but he moved an old coal bunker to where I'd seen it jump over the wall. I remember asking what he was doing, and he muttered something about it not getting over there again. Anyway, I began ignoring it mostly, and it began to kind of lurk on the edges. Something we didn't know what it was, but you'd know when it was around, and also kind of knew that it didn't want to hurt us. My dad sadly passed away in 2008. Life moved on. I moved out at 20, moved in with my current partner, 2012. We adopted a big dog that October, big Mastiff Cross, which weighed more than I did at the time. One night I was walking it alone up a country lane for, its last walk of the night, and it began growling at some trees. I was a little spooked, as I was suddenly aware that I was on a dark lane with a dog with a behaviour problem. I thought it was just a huge shrub and that maybe there was a cat or even a badger in it, and the dog maybe was picking up on that. And then I realised that there was a drop behind the fencing and that shrub was just the top of a small tree, what sat behind some tall shrubs on our side of the fence. I was looking down at the dog's head as I tugged on the lead, and I saw a furry thigh emerge from the twiggy foliage, and it moved towards us. I didn't look up. I swiveled my hips and I dragged the now snarling dog up the road. We had many problems with that dog. Despite having experts come to assess him and give us training plans, we had to give him back that December. He was truly dangerous, and he would flip out from the best dog ever to a scary human and dog aggressive creature. I was not the first person he attacked while under our care, and it was not the first time. We did our best, and it tore us apart having to give up on him after such a short time. I'm digressing anyway. Fast forward a few years, we had another dog, and he really was the best dog. Walking him, I'd have some kind of deja vu. My dog would give a growl towards hedges or seemingly empty fields, and we'd hear twigs crunching behind a hedgerow next to us as we walked on the road. or I'd see ice shine about 6 inches off the ground. I had a feeling my old pal had found me and was joining in on our walkies. And settling as it was, I realised he had ample opportunity to kill me, and he hadn't bothered. So I began to sing to him when I walked up there with the dog. The singing helped me relax when adrenaline had flooded into my system, when a twig, crunched, or I'd hear something a little too close, which would bring on an overwhelming feeling of fear. I'd sing louder. This is how things went on for a long time. My boyfriend didn't really believe it, but he'd hear twigs crunching and would eventually come to the conclusion that myself and my mum hadn't been having mass hallucinations, because that would mean that he had them too. That year was awful. I received some messages from a deranged neighbour, basically regarding how he would take me off my street and where my trousers would be when he finished with me. I don't particularly wish to write that out. It's something I have put behind me. I was nervous from then on, walking up there past his house alone, but I had livestock to tend to, so I had to. One night I was halfway there when I saw a torchlight bobbing up and down in the lane I was walking on. It filled me with complete fear. I was trembling. I called out for Wolfie. Now, I'm either very unimaginative or go way beyond when giving things names. I don't know why I called out for him, but I did. I did it instinctively. I got to the gate and waited. I didn't want to be trapped in the stable with him. I wanted the opportunity of space to at least fight and have a chance of getting away. At that moment, I could see my partner, and I was so relieved. But he looked a little squirrely. He kind of hugged. I went inside the field and I did what I needed to do. And when I came out again, my boyfriend was really pale. Something just breathed down my neck, and I swear something shadowed me the whole way up here. Now, he'd been putting the twig crackling, on all our walks, to simply sheep in the fields. Nothing untoward, nothing scary. He didn't feel like that anymore. I'd asked my boyfriend to come up with me due to having to walk past that man's house, but he ummed and ahed, and then felt guilty if I'd left on my own. Having something breathe down his neck, he was now beginning to put two and two together. Finally believed I wasn't delusional. Since then, we've noticed a trend over our nearly 9 years together. Whenever I'm incredibly scared or upset, he shows up. After an accident in 2015, my partner had heard something softly growling and pacing around below our bedroom window as I lay in bed. I was bruised, beaten, and not with, I wasn't with it due to the knock on my head. And the neighbour said they saw a giant dog running towards our back garden when I returned from the hospital stay last October. When my mum passed away last spring, I'd sit in the back garden at night and cry by myself so I wouldn't bother my partner. He saw me cry enough during the day. I wanted to give him some space, and I knew Wolfie would be there. I often heard him rustling the leaves on the hedge, or I'd see his shape behind the hedge, or behind the shed, watching me. I don't think he would hurt me, and he seems to understand that I can find him physically terrifying to look at. I may have not told him that he was scary looking. I think one night I said it in my head, and he seems content to just follow us. But he lets us know he's there most times, keeps out of sight. I haven't seen him like when he was in Mum and Dad's back garden. One day I'll be brave enough and he will feel comfortable enough to show himself fully, I think. I'm sorry this was so long, Deb. I'm sure I'm missing parts out. There's just so much to fit in. I've seen a lot of odd things before, UFOs, paranormal events, but nothing I couldn't explain away with enough incentive. And although one UFO sighting I do remember is when Mum and Dad and I were watching the sky. We saw either the quickest helicopter known to man with the worst pilot, or a lost alien with a broken compass. I can explain away most things, but I can't explain Wolfie away though. Now, she updated me on the 17th of March 2021, and she said, it's 12:48 a.m. I just let the dogs out in the back garden about 20 minutes ago. and I walked away to feed the cats, and by the time I poured food into the bowl, our 8-year-old collie was at my feet. He was looking scared. He didn't want to go back out. So I went to check on our nearly 2-year-old retriever, and he was standing upright, as tall as he could get, standing against our fence and sniffing at the neighbour's hedge. The hedge is probably 7 to 8 feet tall. He was completely engrossed in whatever he was doing, but I couldn't see as our outdoor light isn't very powerful. I shone my phone torch towards the hedge, and he immediately started barking at the hedge. He calmed down and came away, but my 8-year-old dog was hunkered in the kitchen, staring at me with wide eyes. He's currently hunkered down at my side of the bed and acting like someone's giving him a telling off. Could be nothing, but my older neighbour's dog, I think maybe it might not have been that. I think probably it was a visit from my old friend. Update on the 18th of August 2022. Hi Deb, hope all's going well. I was speaking to my uncle and Wolfie came up in conversation. I believe he'd been watching something about Skinwalker Ranch and I'd made a comment about seeing things like that as well. Well, one thing led to another and I'll try and explain what he told me. Back in the 1970s, 1980s, I wasn't sure, but Mum kept horses on our yard up by Campsie Fells near Glasgow. My uncle would often be with her and her friends as they fed and settled the animals for the night, or maybe still riding, in the summer, autumn months. He told me there were numerous encounters with Wolfer. One woman who was with Mum, I think she was a policewoman, or the horse was an ex-police horse, I can't recall. Well, she fell, broke her ankle when her horse spooked. Apparently, she saw something in the tree line and told them to come out. I can see you. And her horse spooked at that moment. I believe my mum was with her, got her back to the yard safely. Every single encounter my uncle told me of, there was someone hurt by a horse spooking, but mum's never did, and she was never hurt. He could tell me how he never saw anything, but he did smell something, and it smelled like the smell of a wet dog. He also told me how Mum had gone to her dad and told him that she saw a wolfman, a kind of creature, and he laughed and said it was probably just a dog soldier. Now, neither of us understood what that meant, as the movie for dog soldiers came out long after my granddad had passed away in the early 90s. I thought I'd relay it to you anyway. I did find it interesting that Mum never told me any of this, but my uncle said how freaked out she would be, and she'd keep him close by to protect. He was a good few years younger than her, I believe. So whatever Wolfie is, he's at least that old. It must have been so confusing for Sammy. Like me, she doesn't know if Wolfie is a friend or a foe. For all he's scared her in the past, he's also saved her on occasions. From the way her parents spoke, they also knew of his existence. Or at least they hinted at knowledge of his kind, didn't they? Now, she no longer lives in the UK, but I think a part of her will always be tied to that land here and to him. What I'm going to do in a couple of weeks is look at this area, look at the area in Moncton where the lady was killed by foxes, and also look at some habituation sites that are up on the Moray Firth where a dogman was shot and killed in the 1980s, and I'll put those reports together for you. At this time of year in the UK and all across the globe, people head out to a cottage or cabin in the woods to enjoy their winter break. Warm, dark afternoons and nights in around the fire. No internet or TV interference, while the children enjoy indoor games in bad weather, and all the joys of the Scottish winter outdoors. One family who rented a cottage in Deeside for 2 consecutive years were plagued by an unknown prowler on their last visit. A witness said, "We were staying at a holiday cottage in Deeside, 2019. At night, about 7 o'clock every evening, for about a week, we heard a very strange, undulating siren-like howling, which went on for hours. The howling was really long, loud, and happened repeatedly over several nights. We thought it was coming from the woods, then kind of echoing, across the hills. There's nothing to make that sound out there. It wasn't our first visit to the cottage. We'd been there in 2019. Listening to that howling was inexplicably unnerving. I'd even say creepy. And that feeling has stayed with us ever since we left. I'm certain whatever made that howling sound was coming up to the cottage, and I think it was urinating up the walls by the back door. The smell it left behind was rank, and in my opinion, it smelled worse than a septic tank. It wasn't a fox. I know what foxes smell like, and this made your eyes water. There were no leaks anywhere, and we checked. The kids tried to pick up the sledges, and their hands picked up this rank liquid. It was revolting. During the visit, I saw something huge. I don't know what it was, but it was hairy, with green, glowy, reflective eyes, and it was looking in the window of the holiday home. The sill on the window was higher than my head, 5'8" in my boots. So wherever it was, it must have been tall. When I saw the eyes, it just emptied your thoughts from fear. I didn't know what it was. I just backed out of the room, closed all the doors, said nothing to anyone. It then banged on the window a few minutes later, and you could see this hairy mark, like a hairy football, had hit the window. I saw the eyes, face, and hand after returning indoors, 5 minutes after I'd been outside to the freezer. And I was terrified the whole time I was out there. I was convinced something was coming to get me. When I got to the steps, I got too scared and I ran. I threw myself inside against the door and I jammed my foot at the bottom to pin it shut and lock it. I was shaking and I still didn't look out that window, which had no curtains to close. I was not going outside again that night. I felt so scared out there and in the kitchen, but I couldn't understand why. It was insane. There wasn't a peep of sound outside, which was unsettling in itself. I was alone in the kitchen sorting out the last few things, and I was consciously keeping my gaze below the window level. I wasn't looking out that window in case I saw something. It was like I was breathing fear, and then it knocked on the window. A double tap with its first two fingers. The hand on this thing looked strange. Very close to a human hand, but the fingers were very thick, like a chimpanzee's. They were hairy on the back, and they weren't the same proportion as a human's, and the thumb wasn't in the correct angle or articulation. The palm looked to be different, longer somehow. Its face was black, mostly hairless, but the head was covered in black hair, and it had a kind of Homer Simpson protruding mouth that gaped at me. Now the jaw was broader and more heavy than a human's, and the cheeks were more muscular. I didn't see teeth, but the mouth gaped at me, and its eyes glowed this greenish yellow, but not sharp like a cat's. The eyes did kind of capture you. They were watery, gave off a blurry glow. This thing was huge, and it had to have passed two of the cottage windows at least to be right in front of me. So it looked me in the face, and it could see into the lobby beyond that kitchen door. The lobby led to where my family was sitting. If it came from the woods and come to the window, it was watching us. I dropped my gaze, switched off the lights, backed out, closed both doors into the living room. I closed the living room curtains. I kept everyone indoors, saying the noise that they'd heard was my jacket that had probably fallen off the hook. I put a film on so everyone else got into that and didn't look at the small window by the fireplace. I don't know if it was a physical creature I'd seen or some kind of Yule ghostly thing. If it was real, what could it be? There was nothing like that in the UK. I switched off the lights, closed the doors, and hoped it would go away. Within minutes, it banged on the window, loud enough to hear and startle everybody. That night, I was up and down all night looking out the bedroom window. The sheep in the field were all in a cluster, horns out. Sheep are like gas. They fill a field and don't tend to bunch up. And they were strangely silent. They were all in a circle, horns out, staring down at the house with the ram out slightly in front. I never saw anything when I was looking out the window. but I heard gravel scrunching and rock moving outside the kids' bedroom. The next morning, there were watermarks, probably scent marks on hindsight, about the back door, and that awful rank smell. It was over the side of the door frame and on the kids' sledges. We had to wash the kids' hands when the sledges were taken from them because the smell was revolting. I have to be honest, I bet this family couldn't wait to park the car up and head home. Luckily, the children were not aware at any point of what happened on that holiday, and they will have nothing but fond memories of their visit, like Mum. Can you imagine how you'd feel if this kind of situation happened at your family home on more than one occasion? In 2020, I was contacted by a young lady who lives in Derbyshire. She actually lives on the Fairfield estate, and she said, "Hi Deborah, I message you as I'm wondering if you'd like to know about my experience with a werewolf that I encountered in Buxton, Derbyshire. Before my encounter happened, as we're a family, we were hearing growls around our house. And the strange thing is, we live on an ordinary estate. The estate's called Fairfield, and there are lots of homes there. But there are also acres of fields, only, just up the path, lots of farmland. Lots of things have happened to the family over the years in the fields. Mum even had some experiences growing up. The first growling incident happened when my mum was taking out the wheelie bin one night. This would have been late 90s. And as she did so, she heard a loud growl. Not recognising the noise, she thought at first that it was the wheelie bin itself grinding on something. But the growl happened again when she stopped with the bin. And to be honest, it really freaked her out. There was another occasion when Mum was taking our dogs for a walk with my brother, and they both saw an upright big animal that was running across the fields close to our home, and it was jumping over the dry stone walls as it fled. My mum said it was running really fast. In the early 90s, I think it was about 1995, my other brother worked at the local chicken factory up Harper Hill in Buxton. One shift, he was having a cigarette outside, and he said, as he was standing there, he saw a giant dog on its back legs rummaging through the bin. Now, it was one of those big industrial bins with a lid. My brother said the giant dog was using its hands to pick up chicken. Also, it must have lifted the bin lid up to get in there to search for food. I remember my other brother. He said my brother was so shocked when he was telling us what happened. I was still a kid. He'd have been about 17 at the time when this happened. Fast forward, early 2000s. I was getting the washing in the garden, and I remember it was summer, just after 10 p.m, so it was just getting dark out. My German Shepherd dog named Cody was looking at something outside of our garden, and then I heard a loud growl, as though something was standing right next to my ear. Then, New Year's Day, 2020, early hours of the morning. I'd come in from a night out, about 2 a.m. by then. I was in the kitchen with my mum, and we used to leave the kitchen sink window open for our two house cats to come in and out during the night. And we noticed the cats didn't want to go out. So my mum said, "Shut the window, Louise." I went over to the window and I leaned over the sink to shut the window because it was wide open. And as I did, I saw something strange. I could not believe what I was seeing. Something was there. It was an all-white werewolf. It was crouched down under the window as though it had been looking in at us. And it just looked at me. And I looked at it. I don't think it expected to be seen. I couldn't believe it. I could clearly see it, and it didn't have a long snout. It had kind of a short snout. It looked more like the old Wolfman creatures, say, from the horror movies, rather than like the dog soldiers type of things you see now. It was like a wolf that I've seen in pictures. All of the grey wolves looked like him, and his eyes were exactly like theirs. His ears weren't on top of his head, they were at the side. I was shocked. I backed up and said to my mum, "I've just seen a fucking werewolf." The strange thing was, I didn't feel overly threatened by it. And then I thought I'd better shut the bloody window in case it decides to come in. So I looked again, and it was gone. Luckily, one of the things that came into my mind when I saw it was, "You are not supposed to exist." It's the most recent event though, Deb. That's my main concern. I was with Mum, and we were sitting in the kitchen having a cuppa. Wednesday, 27th of June 2020. It's about 3 a.m. in the morning. We're sometimes up nearly all night because my mum has some really bad problems sleeping because of her disabilities. So we usually stay up until the pain's eased off. Anyway, we had the kitchen window open above the sink, just a crack, and it set in position so that nobody could pull it open. It was locked in that kind of position. And then we heard this knocking sound against the open bit of the window pane, like you would hear if you knock your knuckles. And then the outside light came on. And in the light, I saw this grey elbow. That's all I saw. I don't remember much else about what happened. And that's what's creeping us out. I instantly forgot about this incident until I was asking Mum some questions that you'd sent over to us. Why are these creatures showing themselves to people? What's their agenda? I can't answer that, to be honest, and I'm just grateful for the fact that these people were behind locked doors at home when it happened. I know it's not attack proof when you're at home, but I believe it's safer than being confronted by a creature that pulls you from your camp or out of your tent, or something like that. The next case I'm sharing came into me from a gentleman called Robert Manton. It was quite long, as each of the experiences have been tonight. I have had to shorten the experiences so that I could fit them all in. But you can find each of them in singular videos up on the channel with all of the information in them. So Robert said, before I proceed, Deb, I'll share with you the location of my experience, but I'm not sure you should share it with everyone else. I don't want anyone to go looking for them and get themselves hurt, because I was very lucky to walk away from my experience. It all happened the second weekend of April 2021. After a tough lockdown due to the pandemic, I'd made plans to go hiking in some of England's beautiful mountains and forests for a couple of days. So with everything packed in my rucksack, I was on my way. Checked out the visitors centre. I made sure I had trail maps and everything. I decided I had everything I needed, so I set off. Big smile going from ear to ear. I was really happy. The day passed by leisurely. The scenery was breathtaking. Saw waterfalls, wildflowers, sweet yet musky smell that kind of filled the air was fantastic. My senses were alive and popping. I felt great. And when I think about things now, I'm sure I brought on what happened to me. In all honesty, I really didn't want to stay at the campsite and not really want to be surrounded by people. So I was a bit naughty, went off track. I decided to camp deep in the forest along the hillside. At the time, it seemed like a great idea. Would I do it again? With what I know now? No. But at that time, I had no idea what was to come. I was just really happy to be where I was at that moment. I started to search for a clearing so I could set up my tent, somewhere suitable to light a small controlled fire, warm up some food and make some cocoa. Everything was going perfectly through the evening. I could hear noises around me, the cracking of twigs, rustling. There was quite a bit of noise, really. I just thought it was down to the rabbits and deer and some other woodland creatures. I sat up from next to the fire and I started to tip some water over it to put it out before I went to sleep. Safety first, as always. And as I started to pour the water on the fire, I had a strange sensation wash over me. A warning feeling that I shouldn't be putting the fire out, and that it was such a pretty thing, strangely. As the fire went out, for no reason I could think of, I became filled with sorrow and sadness. I couldn't understand what this was about. Why was I feeling like that? It just came out of nowhere. And then I suddenly became very calm, like a reassuring thought had been placed in my mind. Be still, be calm, be safe. It rolled around in my mind continuously. But somehow I knew these thoughts weren't mine. They were not my thoughts. I wanted to run. Something wasn't right with this situation. But I couldn't move. I was rooted to the spot. I really started to panic though. Suddenly these thoughts had become questions. Why did you put out that pretty fire? Why are you here? These questions rolled around my mind, invading me from every angle. What came next made me near enough mess myself. Whatever this voice was coming from, it said, but not with words, "You are okay, little one. You are safe. We will watch over you. Strangely enough, I began to feel calm again. I felt safe. I started to think I was having a mental episode of some kind. Those words rolled and rolled around in my head. I started to feel scared again now. That warm feeling had gone. I started to frantically pack up my camp and my belongings, and I'm telling myself, I'm out of here. And suddenly, from nowhere, I start to feel weak. My head's spinning. I keep falling to my knees. I remember holding my head, feeling pressure I would have sworn was going to make my head explode. I felt sick. Something wasn't right at all with me now. Out of nowhere, this low, deep, vibrating rumble came from my 6 o'clock position. The grumbling sound was growing stronger and louder with every second. The sound was crippling me somehow. I had no strength. I thought I was going to die, then and there. Somehow, over the top of the rumbling and vibrating sound, I could just make out, "Run, little one, run." It was impossible to follow those requests. I couldn't move any part of my body. I was completely frozen, but that voice was urging me to run. I tried to stand up, tried to fight it, and I got about halfway up when boom, I was knocked completely off my feet. I was sent sprawling, God knows how far, but if I had to guess, I'd say I was shoved at least 10 feet away from where I'd been. I looked up, and I saw something that is impossible. Standing there, not far from me, are two sash creatures. Now, that's the word Robert uses for these creatures, so I'm going to keep using that word as we continue. And that was bad. But what was worse was that they were standing between myself and this absolute giant of a creature I couldn't name. It wasn't a sash like them. I don't know what it was to this day. I tried to get up, but I found I was being held down by an unseen force. I started to freak out. That calm feeling started to come back a bit. I wasn't scared anymore. I looked down and I saw two big hairy arms that were holding me. I spun around, so I'm now face to face with one of these sash creatures. It was young, not as big as the other two, and much smaller than the unnamed creature. I sensed it was female. When we locked eyes, I could see the warmth and the love that was in hers. She was protecting me. She held my gaze and refused to let me look away at what was going on over my shoulder. I saw only her eyes. The sounds I heard going on around me assured me there was a major battle going on, and she kept me mesmerised. This went on for what seemed like an hour of fighting, but it was probably more like 5 minutes, even less in reality. And then everything went quiet. When things became silent, I realised the violence had stopped, and things were now eerie and still. The young female sash, she was still holding me, loosened her grip, let her eyes flick past me. I turned to see this creature, and the sash creature was about 8, 9 foot tall, and it was dragging a lifeless body into the deep forest. The creature's body. The young sash must have known my thoughts as she tapped me with the back of her hand and pointed towards a broken tree, and what I saw saddened me. There, at the broken part of the tree, was a sash. She was sat up, leaning against the tree, and she looked to be in a really bad way. Then, the young sash was in my head. "Follow me." I went to grab my backpack and my belongings. She grabbed my arm in such a way that words and thought projected were listened to. She led me to the biking trail, pushed me onto it. She pointed in the direction I must go. And as she turned to leave, I reached out and I grabbed her hand and she paused. She let me take her hand and she said in my mind, "My mother is dying. The others will blame you. Please go now." In desperation, I said out loud, as well as trying to do it mentally, "Thank you. Thank you." She smiled. I went to speak more, but she slid her hand up to silence me. She stroked the side of my face, softly smiled one last time and said, "Thank you for letting me see your memories and your soul." And then she turned and left. Afterwards, the next week was a bad one for me, as you can imagine. I just couldn't get my head around everything that had happened. So I hit the internet, found some channels. These stunt channels stopped me from losing my mind, and thankfully led me to you. As for the sashes, the younger one that was projecting to me, you could tell she was female, and she was close to my height, about 6 foot tall. I assumed the other two were her parents. Both parents were around 8 to 9 foot tall. The fur reminded me of the fur that chimpanzees have. It was fine, but thick and protective. You could see very defined muscles. For a size example, their thighs were probably 3 times the size of mine. As this all happened in moonlight, the fur just looked black to me. It covered them like a chimpanzee, but the hair was very sparse across the chest and the belly area. The creature that they killed to protect me, I struggle to describe it, even now. It was standing up on 2 legs, and it was as black as the night sky. It was just a bit bigger in stature and height than the adults that was protecting me. I still don't know what I saw. It was just big, and it clearly wanted to hurt me. I've never gone back to that same spot out of respect. They protected me. They saved me, possibly, at great cost to themselves. I'm not sure they'll be as friendly if I went back. Since then, I've reflected a lot, as you can imagine. These are my following ideas, really, my theories on why and what. My respect for these beings is massive. I know I'm lucky to be alive. I do believe that they are capable of reading our minds and that they know our intent. The creature that came for me was around 10 to 12 feet in height. I'm guessing, as I have no way of knowing for sure. It had 2 legs and 2 arms. It was airy, but only to a point. It had short hair on its back and legs, with no hair at all on its arms. Its eyes were kind of green, that I've never seen before. It had big eyes that were deeply set, a very prominent jawline. It was very square. Its nose was more of a bump, with 2 gaping holes for nostrils. I couldn't see any ears whatsoever. Its hands were very human-like, but they were very long, too long. To the point, it looked wrong and out of proportion, if you get what I mean. His feet were massive, and the nail on the big toe was huge, almost like a weapon. From what I've heard about dogmen and werewolves, it's not that. It had no snout, or dog ears of any kind. Nothing about it was dog-related. And that's my experience. I feel a little stupid sending this. Well, embarrassed really. At the start of the year, I would never have believed anything like this was possible. And now I've seen them for myself. I can't deny them. A little bit of an update. He said, Deb, thank you for getting back to me. Just having someone that believes me and confirms I'm not going mad means so much. I was thinking about staying anonymous, but if I did, I feel I'd be doing my experience injustice, so please feel free to use my name. You asked would I want to see him again, and I feel the answer should be no. But something inside me yearns to see it again. Can't explain it. But if I know I'm possibly, not welcome there, that something that could happen would go wrong, I'm not going back there. I still dream of the one that was badly hurt. I hear the screams, the shouts and the thuds. I can feel the young one holding me tight, shielding me. I try to picture the horrible creature, but my mind won't allow me to do it. I get like this faint picture in my mind, and as quick as it's there, it's gone. I've started to wonder if something was done to me in order to make me forget the creature and what it looked like. I don't know for sure. It's just a thought that crossed my mind. Maybe in the future, like I said, I'll revisit that place, go and try and give thanks, or something like that. Am I to blame for what happened? So many questions like that fly around my mind. I'm sure you understand that, Deb. The whole thing has made me question the world we live in. Like you say, if we share this, someone else might come forward. They might have something similar, and fingers crossed, around the same location as mine. I think when I found you, I thought you had this magic wand of truth and knowledge, and all the answers to the questions that I have, and that wasn't fair of me. I'm sorry. I wonder if there are any groups you could point me to in that direction. I wish it was that easy. And lots of people say the same thing to me. They come to me and they think I can say, right, this is what you're seeing, this is what happened, and here's how we go about it. But unfortunately, it's not like that. As you've heard from the cases tonight, each and every one of them is completely different. But we're still dealing with a human being that's seeing a creature or more than one creature and not knowing what is friend or foe. Not know why you're seeing this, why me? Why did I see? Why has this happened to me? And I don't have those answers. But what I do know is there are lots of people out there who've had experiences like that and they still get up every morning somehow and they go to work or they do whatever it is they do every day, like our witnesses here today. There is life after an experience. The fear can shut you down, and I'm not in denial on that. But what I mean is, it's a process for each of us. And eventually you come out the other side and you realise that if you face something like that, there is nothing on this earth that human beings can throw at you that you can't overcome. And that's probably the message that I'm trying to give you tonight. I cannot believe that we are in 2025 already. Things have changed very, very much. And as the months go on, I will share more from the VBR case files with you all. So thank you to my regular subscribers and everyone that's tuning in for the first time. And if you like a live stream, you should find us on a Saturday on my channel, normally about 8:45 on my YouTube slot. So until then, I will bring you some more stories on the same time, the same day, next week. Good night, everyone.